And hello, friends of Studio Brule. This is Steve Brule, and it is coffee time. Time where I go over some of the stuff that's come across my desk in the last day or so. And today, or rather I should say last night, I came across an article written about Donald Trump's address at Mount Rushmore for July 4th. I think he did it on July 3rd, but I can't really be sure. Can't remember. But in any case, welcome to the show, and that's what we're going to get into. We're going to talk a little bit about Frederick Douglass, destruction of monuments, and the rise of the new racist group, the rise of racism in the West, which is not what historically we've seen before, but quite a lot different. Sharing the same attributes, of course. I'll draw your attention to my VIP club membership to the patriarchy, which of course authorizes me to comment on all the comings and goings of the global evil feminist empire, which is heavily funded by thousands of organizations around the globe. Welcome to EDP and strontium nitrate, Sean, Lenkus, Root Canal, and if I'm missing anybody, Vinyl Meister, Josue, Horror Cocktail, Bill Barry. If I'm missing anybody in the comments, forgive me, because I try to keep my mind on what I have to say in any given day. Hi, Ernest T. Bass. Good to see you guys all in the comments already. So let's get straight into President Trump and his address. I found it interesting in many different ways. It was both hopeful and of concern. Let's read the quote for the title of this Fox News article. And this is what got me thinking from last night till today on what to talk about Monday morning. As you know, most of these are informal sessions, so I don't have time to do any kind of prepared work about this. What I do in these sessions is something catches my eye out of the various things, and then I screen cap and talk about them. So reading this title of the Fox News article, and of course all the links are in the description of the video. Trump in fiery Mount Rushmore address decries rise of far left fascism, calls on Americans to rise up. And that is the truth. There is no avoiding the fact that far left fascism is fashionable today, if nothing else. All these middle class spoiled kids are running to this to a virtue signal as part of this rising Antifa, BLM, Nation of Islam type movements, military movements as well. Let's read a couple of quotes from this article here. Reading from the top here. The president asserted that recent attacks on the nation's monuments alongside, quote, cancel culture and the rise of the Marxist ideology of the Black Lives Matter movement were symptoms of a left-wing cultural revolution that was threatening to overthrow the American Revolution. BLM explicitly advocates the destruction of the nuclear family structure, which Trump said was in fact the bedrock of American life. Yes, many people have commented on that, in fact, that the rise of the West was in fact made possible by traditional Christian values and the sanctity of the nuclear family. I'm not an expert in that area, so I'm not going to comment on that, but it's certainly a commonly expressed sentiment. And it is likely quite a lot of truth to it. The Black Lives Matter are no doubt in every conceivable way, and they self-profess to be a Marxist movement. So there's absolutely nothing even remotely contentious about what is written here or about what Trump said. In fact, the people themselves are saying that that is what they are. And it's, to me, I found it very refreshing that someone, especially someone of the stature or the power of Trump, is actually calling it what it is. We need a lot more of this. Here from the same article, we only kneel to Almighty God, Trump remarked, in a clear shot at athletes who kneel in protest during the national anthem. We will not be intimidated by bad, evil people. It will not happen. Those are quotes of Trump. And clearly he's referring to all these sports teams that are now on board with allowing kneeling and putting slogans on their jerseys even. The kneeling, of course, started with Copernic. And if you watched the show yesterday, I referred to Viva and Barnes, who gave quite a lot of detail in their live stream about Copernic and his utter, complete, fraudulent self. I can't even stress this enough. If you think that Copernic is a fraud, you haven't gone far enough. He is the quintessential fraud. If you look in the dictionary for fraud, you're going to see Copernic in there. The guy hasn't got an honest bone in his body. He was a worthless football player who was on his way out, and he knew it. And he grasped on to a way to attract massive attention to himself, and then he ran with it. Fraud, fraud, fraud. And the whole movement of kneeling is fraudulent. Let's carry on. Reading from the top. We are the country of Andrew Jackson, Ulysses S. Grant, and Frederick Douglass. More on Frederick Douglass very soon. Trump said, we are the land of Wild Bill Hickok and Buffalo Bill Cody. We are the nation that gave rise to the Wright brothers, the Tuskegee Airmen, who are black men, by the way, Harriet Tubman, Clara Barton, Jesse Owens, George Patton, General George Patton, that is, the great Louis Armstrong, Alan Shepard, Elvis Presley, and Muhammad Ali. And only America could have produced them all. No other place. And to be honest, I'm Canadian, okay? To be honest, he's not exaggerating there. As a Canadian, I grew up with Canadians smug in there looking down upon the US as if Canada is some kind of greater country, which it is definitely not. Canada is sinking into this fascist, feminist, leftist, Marxist crap. And we have our child emperor, who is Prime Minister of Canada right now, dictating orders from ensconced within his cottage, has suspended Parliament now. It's going on 3 months, and it will go on till September, October. Canada has no right to look down upon any country in this world, much less the US. And I say that as a Canadian, and I know what I'm talking about on that topic. No other country could have produced. Now, such a wide, broad, and deep collection of innovative people and things and ideas. There is no country in the world in history that can ever compete with this. And he goes on, he gives a lot more examples, but there are tons and tons and tons of examples out there. Louis Armstrong, of course, was a famous jazz trumpet player. And the invention of jazz coming out of Louisiana, going back into the late 19th century, was, and these histories, okay, and it doesn't take away from the truth of it, that these histories are riddled with problems. This is a boiling cauldron. The US is a melting pot. And when you have a melting pot like that, all these cultures and different people and characters and tensions coming together, you have both creativity, a lot of it, a huge amount of creativity, and you have tensions that sometimes flare, and they flare into violence at times. They flare into enormous passionate conflicts. That's unavoidable. That does not mean that the US that does not take anything away from the accomplishments of the US. And I say that because what pushed the history of jazz, and I took a course in the history of jazz a long time ago, 25 years ago or so, and my memory of it was that this came after resegregation. There was a period of time in the southern US where Black Americans were permitted into all areas of life, including higher education, and that included music. Some of these very highly trained, highly skilled Black musicians who were, with the reintroduction of admittedly very bad laws which reasserted themselves and reasserted segregation in the US, these highly trained Black American musicians were forced into intimate contact, living side by side with very, very poor Black Americans, not just Black Americans, but from people from all over the world in the international port of Louisiana. And that is where they got exposed to all forms of music, from traveling sailors and boat people who were coming and going from the port of Louisiana, which was a very busy port, even at that time in the late 19th century. And they got new musical ideas, and they applied their extremely high-skilled training in classical music to these new ideas, and what emerged was jazz. Now, we have to understand that creativity doesn't come in a rarefied, protected space. It comes when ideas are jammed together, and different kinds of ideas and people are jammed together and forced to get along in some way. And sometimes it is a rough getting along. But that doesn't change the fact that the US is one of the most creative countries in the history of humanity, in just about every area that you could look at creativity. Let's read onwards. This is from that same article. We will state the truth in full, without apology. We declare that the United States of America is the most just and exceptional nation ever to exist on earth, Trump said. And I echoed that statement with my good wishes to my American friends during July 4th day, that it is. It is the greatest experiment in individual rights and freedoms in the history of humanity. And there's no guarantee of a great and easy life because you guarantee freedom. Quite the opposite. Freedom is a most difficult, precious thing to protect. Very difficult. Let's read on. In his address, Trump characterized endemic efforts to terminate and humiliate dissent as a form of totalitarianism and an attack on our magnificent liberty, and promised that it will be stopped very quickly. These are great things to hear. The absolute nonsense that's been going on both in the US and Canada and in the West in general, coming from feminist, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, all of these far left socialist Marxist groups, has been going on for far too long. This cancel culture has come out of them. They are the most intolerant group of mental midgets in the history of humanity. And it's no accident that it comes along the grew in a time when all of the standards are lowered in education. But I digress. Let's get on to another quote in this particular article. One of their political weapons is cancel culture, driving people from their jobs, shaming dissenters, and demanding total submission from anyone who disagrees, Trump said. And anyone who has followed this channel for the last 8 years knows well what cancel culture is like, and you'll know well how powerful it has become. It has become absolutely totalitarian, to the point where a professor was kicked, or rather a chair of the board of UBC, as we know from a couple of days ago, was kicked out of his position for liking tweets that the ultra-authoritarian tyrants didn't like. Liking a tweet. Now, this shows you how deeply, how closely they are examining your every move. We're not far off from this group from lifting your finger the wrong way gets you canceled in this culture. Let's read on here. This is the very definition of totalitarianism, Trump says, and it is completely alien to our culture and our values. It has absolutely no place in the United States of America. And I agree 100%. In fact, it has absolutely no place on this planet, if you ask me. These people are an affront to humanity, these Antifa cancel culture people. Let's read onwards. This attack on our liberty, Our magnificent liberty must be stopped, and it will be stopped very quickly. We will expose this dangerous movement, protect our nation's children, end this radical assault, and preserve our beloved American way of life. These words are music to the ears of anyone who cares even a little bit about freedom, about presumption of innocence, about the values that drove the growth of the West, that drove prosperity around the world. This should be music to our ears. This, I hope, will translate into legislation and action from the government, which is far, far stronger than Betsy DeVos's changes to the education system that she announced. Those, as Janice pointed out very clearly in one of her Flamingo files, are far too weak. They change almost nothing. They are trumpeted out as a big change to the education system, but they don't go even remotely far enough. There can be no equivocating on protecting freedom, on protecting freedom of speech, on protecting presumption of innocence, on insisting upon due process in the law. But we've gone a long, long, long ways away from that. And I am hoping here that these words from Trump on July 4th for the July 4th celebration are indicating that he intends to put an end to that childish, spoiled brat nonsense that's been going on for decades. Decades it's been going on. We've created a group of over-entitled, spoiled bullies. And it's time that somebody like Trump brought the hammer down and ended that crap. Let's read on. Reading from the top with me. The violent mayhem we have seen in our streets and cities, which are run by liberal Democrats in every case, Trump said, is the predictable result of years of extreme indoctrination and bias in education, journalism, and other cultural institutions. He's absolutely right. If anything, he's not going far enough. It's every single cultural institution, as we discussed with Janice Flamingo last Saturday. The four pillars that support a civilization, a culture. We're talking about governance, which includes politics and enforcement, meaning the police. We're talking about industry, which produces everything that we need to survive in a society. We're talking about meaning and purpose, the religious institutions. And we're talking about the education system. Those are the four pillars identified by Thomas Berry 25 or 30 years ago, and I forget in what book he wrote that in. But those four institutions are essential to be healthy, to prop up a healthy culture. And they are all completely infested with the disease, the cancer of feminism. And it's time it is weeded out, completely stomped out. Let's read on here. Against every law of society and nature, our children are taught in school to hate their own country, to believe that the men and women who built it weren't heroes, but villains. That is very true, and mostly it's men who have been attacked. We know that. The radical view of American history is a web of lies. Feminism itself, if you've looked at the video, The Birth of Feminism, we go into this in quite detail. Feminism is based upon lies from the very beginning. Its declaration of sentiments at Seneca Falls in 1848 is based upon and references a history that never existed, a history of lies. And yet, they've taken over our culture. Reading from the top. Conservatives have recently objected to some public schools' decision to teach false information from the New York Times 1619 Project. This is incredible to me. The 1619 Project has been criticized resoundingly by some of the top historians ever and some of the top historians alive today, and yet They're pushing it through the school system. 1619 Project, if you know, insists that the U.S. was made possible only by slavery. They say that slavery is the core spirit of the U.S. Nonsense. The author of that project has acknowledged her own anti-white racism, and core claims of the project have been debunked by historians. Absolutely right. These tyrants from the left are dominating, taking over, bullying every institution in our culture. And that is not an exaggeration. Reading from the top. Hours before Trump spoke, CNN, echoing the New York Times, derided Mount Rushmore as a monument to slaveholders on stolen native lands. The New York Times newsroom also sits on land taken from natives, and several CNN reporters previously praised Mount Rushmore as recently as 2016. These organizations, CNN, New York Times, there is no reason that we should be giving any credibility to what these people say anymore. They have lied so much on so many topics. I don't know if you guys remember, there was a celebrated journalist promoted at the New York Times who fabricated stories out of complete thin air. Eventually, he was caught and fired, but he would have gone on forever because the New York Times doesn't give a crap about the truth. They're manipulative, deceitful, left-wing tyrants. They're one of the propaganda arms of that group. Let's read from the top. Trump's comments followed a series of protests and riots across the country that led to the destruction of numerous monuments, as well as the terminations of high-level academics and policy experts simply for challenging Black Lives Matter's push to defund all police departments. Defund the police. Defund the police, who are the only thing standing between moderate order and total chaos and anarchy in many of these neighborhoods in which the black people actually live. Black people in those neighborhoods do not generally want to defund the police. They are killed primarily by other black people in those neighborhoods. Gangs, bullies, thugs, and thieves. Black Lives Matter is a fraudulent organization. Let's read on. They want to silence us, Trump said, as cheers of USA broke out. But we will not be silenced. We want free and open debate, not cancel culture. Amen to that. Their goal is not a better America. Their goal is to end America. But just as in centuries past, the American people will stand in their way. Yes, the silent majority has yet to speak. So we will wait upon that. And I think that is a silent majority. These groups have openly stated their aims to tear down the patriarchy, crush the patriarchy, all that, smash the patriarchy, destroy capitalism. They want to usher in Marxism. They are opposed to freedom of speech. They are opposed to presumption of innocence, and they have had success in enacting laws, legislating laws, at least in Canada and other countries, that eliminate or reduce your right to defend yourself, your freedom, your presumption of innocence. This is already happening, and they intend to keep going until forced to stop. And I, for one, am hoping that the American people will rally behind Trump and force these hate-filled bigots to stop, undo their legislative damage, and bring some of them to justice where they belong. As I've often said, one day history will relegate feminism to its rightful place alongside the KKK and the Nazis as hate movements. And that is exactly what they are. Let's read from the top. I hope you're getting a sense of hope from what Trump is saying here, because Really, Trump is the only world leader today who's even coming close to defending freedoms and rights and liberties, presumption of innocence, and those kinds of things. All of the rest of these cowardly leaders around the world are pandering to the bullies. They haven't got one spine bone to share between them. Reading from the top. As we meet here tonight, there is a growing danger that threatens every blessing our ancestors fought so hard for, struggled, and bled to secure, Trump said, warning of a concerted attempt to wipe out our history and indoctrinate our children. I do recommend that you go and read the full article on Fox because he does detail out quite a lot of examples. Anyone who knows anything about history knows that there's rivers and lakes and oceans of blood that were spilled. Forget our rights, our freedom encoded in law, our presumption of innocence encoded in law. These things did not come easily. They came at the expense of an enormous number of lives, mostly male lives. And yet, these bigots, these hate-filled bigots of the Black Lives Matter, the feminist group, the Antifas, and these various militias, including the Nation of Islam and this new one I'm going to talk about, they want to take that all away. This is racism building. This is bigotry building. It's fascism. Fascism hiding behind the name of Antifa, hiding behind the name of BLM. Let's read onwards. It is time, Trump said, for American politicians to summon bravery, yes, to confront the moment and challenge the so-called social justice proponents who work to divide Americans and seek a breakdown in social order. Yes, if ever there was a moment, it is now. Now, that's all I've got from the Trump speech. I do hope that you go and read the Fox article. The link is in the description. Now, I'm going to touch upon some of these monuments. Recently, now I'll just show this next screenshot up here. Speaking of monuments that are under attack and destroyed, let's read this one from Daily Wire. And I think Daily Wire is a UK paper, but they're watching. Everybody in the world is watching what's going on in the US now. It's spread right around the world. In fact, the bullies and bigots from around the world are using the excuse of the Black Lives Matter movement to riot and loot everywhere in the world. Let's read this quote, this title of this article. Statue destroyed of famed Black abolitionist Frederick Douglass on anniversary of notable speech. Now, this is Black Lives Matter bringing this about, and Antifa. Anyone who knows much about American history has to look up to Frederick Douglass, one of the most principled Americans in the history of the U.S., possibly one of the most highly principled people, human beings, ever to be born on this planet. He stood for and fought for, at great risk, being a black man, his principles. He fought for the rights and freedoms of others. He was part of the abolition movement in 1841. If any monument should be protected by Black Lives Matter, it would be Frederick Douglass. But no, nothing is safe. And this is the point of tyrannical bully movements like BLM and Antifa. Nothing is sacred, nothing is safe, because the point is power, fear. This is what they're about. Let's read this here from the article. A statue of famed Black abolitionist Frederick Douglass was destroyed at Maplewood Park in Rochester, New York over the weekend, which comes on the anniversary of a notable speech that Douglass delivered at an Independence Day event in the city in 1852. This is almost 170 years ago. 170 years ago, and they allow it to be destroyed. Reading from the top. The destruction of the statue comes on the 168th anniversary of a notable speech that Douglas gave where he said, "The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to be overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here today is, to me, a matter of astonishment as well as of gratitude. Can you not recognize a national hero when you see one? These people are beyond salvation." Now, here is another thing that I would like to point out about Frederick Douglass. And many of you who have watched The Birth of Feminism, which I recommend you watch on this channel, you know that Frederick Douglass was one of the people in attendance at the Seneca Falls Conference, on which they created the Declaration of Sentiments, which is widely believed, at least in the Western circles, to be the originating founding document of feminism in general. Now, and I pointed this out in The Birth of Feminism, if it wasn't for, I got to emphasize this because this is just incredible to me that this group of people will destroy their own heroes. If it wasn't for Frederick Douglass, the vote would not have even been included in the Declaration of Sentiments. It was Frederick Douglass who gave the lecture, a speech, an impassioned speech, when they were about to sign the document, to include the vote, the right to vote for women. Frederick Douglass, a black man. It was his speech which swayed the entire group to include it, and many of them did it reluctantly. And yet, it was suffrage, the vote, that feminists used throughout the feminist movement as their biggest, strongest point that women were oppressed through history by men. Feminism is nothing but a fraudulent, lying movement. Let's read about that at the Declaration of Sentiments. And let me expand this a bit for you so you can read it from the top. Ultimately, 16 sentiments were ratified and signed, and almost unbelievably, suffrage almost didn't make the cut. Many thought that calling for voting rights would hurt their larger cause, and only after a rousing floor speech from Frederick Douglass arguing that freedom was not divisible according to sex or color did the resolution narrowly pass. Frederick Douglass, under attack by the same idiots who have no moral bone to stand on, who are trying to destroy the culture right now. That's how bad it is. And yet here, I screen capped this from Britannica because you know, as well as I do, that feminists dominate every institution, every group, everywhere in our culture. And they are rewriting history as we speak. And if you look at the Britannica's description of that document, they downplay Frederick Douglass's pivotal role in having that voting rights included. Let's read this. Stanton, the woman here, drew up the Declaration of Sentiments that guided the Seneca Falls Convention, using the Declaration of Independence as her guide to proclaim that all men and women had been created equal. She drafted 11 resolutions, including the most radical demand, the right to vote. Listen to that. She drafted 11 resolutions, including the most radical demand, the right to vote. The right to vote, which she did not want to include. And this is on historical record. This is the Encyclopedia Britannica here. And they are whitewashing over this issue. with Frederick Douglass, a former slave, arguing eloquently on their behalf. All 11 resolutions passed, and Mott even won approval of a final declaration. In other words, Stanton was the one who bravely did this? No. Stanton was an opportunistic coward. She was sitting already at the top of society, and if you watch The Birth of Feminism, you know that it was 8 years earlier at an abolition conference where she was not allowed to sit in the prime spots that she expected to be seating positions, and this was the motivation for her to get back and assert her dominance, her authority, her privilege, her status in society. That's what it was. But Encyclopedia Britannica whitewashes this over and paints the two women as the heroes, downplaying Frederick Douglass's pivotal role in the situation. Okay, I'm going to get on to the next, the next session here, section of screen caps. And this is an alarming development in our culture. It's a symptom in a sense. And the conservative opinion pointed this out, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday as well. Armed group marches in Georgia, quote, "We don't want to talk no more. We don't want to negotiate. We don't want to talk no more." Well, maybe you should go back to school. Let's read what they have to say here. Reading from the top. The group has been identified as the NFAC, which reportedly stands for Not Effin' Around Coalition. This is that long group, that big group of militant folks who marched on, what's the name of that mountain in Georgia, as a display of force. And read this. According to leader Grand Master J, this is the goal of NFAC. Just take a look at that word here, okay? Grand Master J. Doesn't that have echoes of the KKK in it? Isn't it Grand Wizard in the KKK? This guy calls himself Grand Master J. Let's read on. And this is what Grand Master J has to say. The solution is very simple. We file a Declaration of Liberation, declaring every African American descendant of slavery a political prisoner here in the United States. That was affected by the Portuguese slave trade. And then, after that, the United States then has a choice. Either carve us a piece of land out here, we'll take Texas, and let us do our own thing, or don't stop us when we exit this body here and go somewhere where they will give us our own land to build our own nation. Well, as far as I know, there's absolutely nothing stopping you, Grand Master J, from leaving and going to Africa or any other country. It's a free country. The borders are not closed to you unless you've committed a crime, in which case you will have to stay until it's sorted out. So if you're not a criminal, Grand J, then you're free to leave. You and your whole entire army is free to leave. Let's read on here. NFAC's leader, Grand Master J, describing how he will build his black ethno-state within the United States. Boasting, they are all ex-military, extremely disciplined and expert shooters. Okay. Well, let's read on a little bit. There's a picture of Grand Master J in his all-black uniform, calling upon the spirit of Antifa and Black Lives Matter, I'm sure. Here's another picture of him. Here he is, I presume, on his couch, out of uniform. Here he is again. It looks like he's dressed up in some sort of African-styled uniform here. Now, This has a lot of parallels with the KKK, and I want to say something about this. Here, let's have a look, and this is easily available on Wikipedia. The Ku Klux Klan, titles and vocabularies. And I'm going to say right now that Antifa, BLM, and this NFAC, they are in fact the resurrected spirit of the KKK. It doesn't matter which color you are. If you are propagating the spirit of the KKK, then you are in the same family. Let's look at this vocabulary. Aside from titles, well, we don't have to read that. Let's just take a look at here. This is one of the acronyms from the KKK, Orion. Our race is our nation. Our race is our nation. Let that sink in for a minute there. That is one of the guiding principles of the KKK. Now, the guiding principle of this group NFAC, and in fact, Black Lives Matter, is that their race is their nation. This is exactly the same. Exactly. They are not opposing racism in the US. They are racism in the US. Let me repeat that. This is really important. These groups are not opposing racism anywhere in the US or elsewhere. They are racism in the US. A group whose cohesion is based on the color of their skin is by definition a racist group. How is this hard to understand, Mr. Master J? You're a racist, pure and simple. Eventually, these kinds of groups always go down the same road, and we're going to have a look at that here. Let's take a look what the next quote is. Grand Wizard, okay. Wikipedia. This is the name, a title in the KKK. I suspect it still is today, if there is any KKK groups. I don't know. Some people say there are. I don't know. I've never seen any evidence of it. But they use the term Grand Wizard. And what does Mr. J do? Grand Master J. Military. Creating a group based upon the color of your skin. A racist group. And he's got some support here. Check out this guy here. I don't know who this guy is, but he has a lot of followers. He says, let me make it a little bit bigger for you. Stone Mountain, the damn birthplace of the KKK, just got marched on by protesters that refer to themselves as NFAC, not effing around coalition. And he says, we're with y'all. We're with y'all. Imagine that. The new KKK, which is what NFAC is. It is the nouveau KKK. And they can't get the irony that they just formed their group on the same grounds as the old KKK. Let's have a look at this old KK and what the Stone Mountain really is. Stone Mountain and the rebirth of the KKK 1 century ago. By the way, the KKK had a maximum of 4 million, I think, members in their heyday, which is over a century ago. And by the time they ended, they had almost no membership. Let's read this here. Modern Atlanta seems to be fine with that. The Klan's connection with Stone Mountain officially ended when the state of Georgia took over the park in 1958. 1958, over 60 years ago. They're resurrecting it. This NFAC is the resurrection of the KKK, the resurrection of the spirit of racism in the US. The spirit of racism in the US. Let's have a look at a couple of more quotes from these KKK things here, because this gets quite interesting to me. And let's look how the KKK itself evolved, as well as all of these tyrannical fascist groups who base their cohesion upon something like your color of your skin, you will never be black enough, okay? Let me get to that in a minute. Let's read this. In fact, the men who hiked up to the top of Stone Mountain would have had the lynching of a Cobb County Jewish man named Leo Frank fresh in their minds. The KKK wasn't just bigoted against black people. They evolved in the way with the same kind of poison in mind that all of these groups evolve in. Reading this quote, it's very much focused on attacking Jews and attacking Catholics and any people who are not Protestant Anglo-Saxons, said Haley. So they become really equal opportunity haters and articulate a vision of America with themselves at the center. This is the evolution of the KKK. Equal opportunity haters, and here is the point. These NFACs, BLMs, Antifas, they're just starting out on their hatred. It evolves. They will eventually question, how black is black enough? Where is the pure black? It will be their questions. These are the questions will come up to them. How black do you have to be before you can enter NFAC's group? Because not just anybody can enter NFAC's group. They have to go through testing and they have to meet certain criteria. And I'll guarantee you that NFAC is not going to let a white person into their group. So at what point do they cut off the purity of blackness for their members? This will escalate even within themselves. How much mixture is too much mixture for NFAC? The unavoidable fact of this group, unavoidable fact of all of these kinds of groups, like the KKK, like the Nazis, is that it will always evolve to be who is the blackest. In the case of the Jews, not the Jews, but the Germans and the Nazis, who is most pure white? In the case of the KKK, they had to start excluding Catholics and Jews, and they had to. Becomes a competition for who is the most pure. And in feminism, it's a competition for who is the most ideologically committed pure. These tyrannical fascist groups are all share that same criteria. They will always look for who is the purest example of their racist requirement for membership. And this group, including BLM, is a racist group. The cohesion of this group, any group whose cohesive factor is based upon something like the color of your skin, is a racist group. I'm going to say a few other things here. I don't know what much more I've got to go on. I'll talk about this guy a little bit more in a minute. I want to make this point as clear as I possibly can. The U.S. is not a racist country. I'm going to repeat it because this is if by chance some feminist, bigoted, fascist idiot comes across this channel and sees this, I want to get it through their thick, concrete ears. The U.S. is not a racist country, even though it has been home to racist groups, and it has. And I touched on this earlier in the video. It is a melting pot. It is filled with all kinds of people from all over the world, all of whom seek the freedom, the rights, the protections, the presumption of innocence that the U.S. almost alone in the world provides. These are the spirit of the country. This is the true spirit of the country, and it is written in the Constitution. I'm going to repeat this again because it is so important. The U.S. is not a racist country, even though it has been home to racist groups, and it is home to racist groups today. And CFA is one of them. There, as I'm told, there is a KKK element. There's some white supremacist groups. It is home to some racist groups. That does not make the USA a racist country. The cohesion of the USA is based upon its Constitution. And in that Constitution, they've written and they defend that, sometimes not strong enough. But it is written in there, and the spirit of the USA is that all men are created equal. And in that, they mean all women too. And the US has demonstrated repeatedly its commitment to this principle by amending its Constitution to strengthen this spirit. That's what defines the USA as a country. The fact that racist groups can find a foothold in there, they find those footholds in there because it's not a fascist country. A fascist country would never allow a group like NFCA or KKK to form. The spirit of the USA is in its Constitution. And it's that needs to be protected. It's that defines the country in the global community. So let's carry on and have a look at some more details about Mr. Grandmaster J, leader of the new force of racism that is rising in the US. Does not define the US either. Oh, he's hip hop too, so he's multi-talented. Calls himself a 2016 US presidential candidate. I find that hard to believe. Let's read on. Here is his a tweet from his Twitter account. The NFAC, Black Guns Formation, July 4th. Here's another one from his Twitter account. Let me expand this up for you. The NFAC is not effing around coalition. An all-black militia comprised of mostly ex-military shooters. Any more questions? Let's read on. And this fellow here, Kevin Cosby, retweeted and added to this guy's page, Master J's page, saying 5 reasons black women should be leery of interracial intersectionalism. Notice how all of their identity that they want to subscribe to revolves around their color. And this means that they will judge one another based on how black you are. But it ultimately demonstrates that this ultimately is a racist group. And here he goes on to list a bunch of reasons why black women should stay away from basically all white people. White women and gays were slave owners. White women and gays have white privilege. White women and gays have wealth black women don't have. White women and gays set the agenda. It disrupts black unity. It disrupts black unity. In other words, in no uncertain terms, folks, they are united. They want to unite people based on their skin color. Any group whose cohesion is based on the color of their skin is, by definition, a racist group. And anyone who calls for cohesion based on the color of your skin is a racist person. And that includes you, Kevin W. Cosby. And here he is, lo and behold, a senior pastor at a church in Kentucky. Racism. This is the new racism rising in the US. This is the primary target are white people. The primary target of all hatred in the West is white men. But this will expand. These kind of fascist tyrants expand by requiring you to demonstrate your purity, how far you are up the pecking order of blackness, or whatever it is their criteria for cohesion is. Here's another tweet from the Grand Kuba of the new racist organization, Black Guns Formation Atlanta and Phoenix. And here's another one here. Time is short, he says. Get in formation, black people. Exercising our constitutional rights to peacefully assemble and bear arms. Apparently he did not stay in school long enough. I'm not sure what the arms of bears have to do with his movement. Organized for the future. Be a part of history. This is racism rising. This is the new KKK. This is the reincarnation of the KKK right here. And it's an open, broad daylight because our culture has been prepared for this by 50 or 60 years of feminist hatred of white men. No, it's not spelled correctly. Bear arms, he means in this spelling here. Oh no, actually, I am wrong. I'm so embarrassed. You are right. He's bear arms. Okay. So anyways, that's an embarrassing point that I'll have to live with for the rest of my life. And I'm sure my detractors will cut that clip out of this video, and it will be the most popular clip I have ever put out in my life. There we go. So here, I think this is the last screen capture that I have. And this is what Grandmaster Jay has to say. Never go to war with someone who gives 2 less Fs than you. What does he mean by that? You know what he means. He's going to war. This, amongst all of his other things, means that this fellow intends to go to war. He's raising an army. And I was called to task on why I said that this represents a foreign army on American soil. And it's precisely because of this. These people are declaring themselves to be non-citizens of the U.S., independent of the U.S. They're demanding a country of their own. They're saying they're going to war. And their compatriots in other factions like BLM and Antifa have already been tearing apart the U.S., tearing down monuments, setting police stations on fire, burning down buildings, beating white people unconscious for the simple reason that they're white. This war has already started. They're not even pretending that they want peace. They're not even pretending that they want a peaceful solution to anything. So, I want to acknowledge Harry Halbrook here for his generous contribution to Studio Brûlé. I'd like to remind people that your contributions are pretty much the only way we get any revenue here to continue our work. So definitely appreciate it. And if you can, please help us here on Studio Brûlé. We've got a lot of projects we want to get at, some of which require more equipment. And I do have two stretch projects that I want to complete that will require a budget, because I want to get at least one film into theaters, and that's going to cost. The reason I say in theaters is that we are being blocked out and suppressed on mainstream media. We bring a film to theaters and get protested and shut down and blocked. That will bring more attention to our topics than any amount of videos on YouTube probably will ever get. Thank you, Harry Halbrook, for your support. Harry says, AGM, all guns matter. Just have the ammo. It seems like it would be well advised, you'd be well advised to buy guns and ammo today. because you don't have to go to war. The war is coming to you. It has already shown up on your shores and at your door fronts and in your communities, on your streets. So having said that, let me just check if I have got nothing else to point out before I turn off. Nope, that's about it for today. So thank you for joining me here on Coffee Break with Steve. And do tune in. I hope to be on tomorrow too. I'll be looking for items as I'm always scanning the media to see what's worth talking about. And as I like to remind you, do something you love to do every single day. That includes today. No matter how bad it seems to get, no matter how depressing, do something you love to do, because that's the best thing you can do for your health of mind and body and spirit. Things are going to get worse with feminism, so we have to find a way to live a rich, full, satisfying, and contented life, no matter how bad it gets. So with that, I hope you join me tomorrow for another session with Coffee with Steve. Good day for now, and to see you soon.